your cell. So everything I'm talking about will be labeled in that document. Okay, so again, we've gone over all of this, the layers of the skin, and then the hypodermis, and then the 2 layers of the dermis. So now we're going to go into the structures. This structure on this side and here is called the sweat gland. And let me just say this, all of this on the left side is cut open. All of this on the right side is not cut open. So you're seeing the look of the sweat gland here cut open and the sweat gland not cut open. So both of these little balls of little white squiggly lines, those are your sweat glands. The tubes leading off of the sweat glands here and here are your sweat gland ducts. And the openings at the top are your sweat gland pores. So on a hot summer day, your sweat glands are steadily producing sweat. That sweat is released and travels up the sweat gland duct and is released through holes on the skin called your sweat gland pores or pores of the sweat gland. Okay, now let's look at the hair. So all of this brown in here, all this brown is your hair root. Then as it swells down here, the swelling area is your hair bulb. Then this little opening right here, this is called your hair papilla. The hair papilla is a hole in the bottom that allows for blood vessels to come up there to nourish the hair with blood, okay? So again, the hair here underneath the skin, so all the hair underneath the skin here is your hair root. Then this area that is swollen here is the hair bulb. And then this opening down here at the very end is your hair papilla. All of this purple sheath all the way around the hair, this is your hair follicle. So it's just the sheath that your hair sits in. And here you'll see it cut open and it's this ring of purple around this hair root and hair bulb. So all of that would be your hair follicle. Now associated with each hair is a gland called a sebaceous gland. And trying to find a good color that will work here. Okay. So all of this right here is your sebaceous gland in green circled, and all of this is a sebaceous gland. Your sebaceous gland is going to be producing an oily substance that conditions each of the hairs and keeps them from being super brittle. So you'll see a sebaceous gland associated with every hair follicle. You also see a muscle, and I'm going to just draw one green line on top of that muscle. Each hair follicle has a muscle called an Erector Peli muscle. The Erector Peli muscle will force the hair to stand erect above the skin. So if you're ever cold or you're frightened, your hair will stand erect. So if you've ever said, oh, my hair on the back of my neck just stood up, that's because of that Erector Peli muscle. This also, because it pushes the hair up, causes chill bumps. Okay, so again, that muscle is your Erector Peli muscle. Down here in the hypodermis, so the hypodermis, remember, is all of this area here that sits underneath the dermis, not a skin layer again. It's made up of mostly adipose tissue. So all of these yellow circles here, that represents your adipose tissue. We also have, let me erase this so we don't have too much going on here. We also have some structures that have to deal with your sensation of different pressures and pains. So at the very top here, looks like little flowers. Those are your tactile or Mesner corpuscles. Tactile or Mesner's corpuscles. So these are going to sense a very light touch and pressure, okay? Then you have these down here, looks like a peeled onion, okay? So they have that layer after layer after layer. That is your lamellated or Pacinian corpuscle. So I'm gonna go down a little bit so you can see the spelling of that one, because it is a little bit different. So again, here you see your lamellated or Pacinian corpuscle. This is going to detect a deep pain or deep pressure. So if I'm pushing really, really hard on you, this one down here, this corpuscle, is going to be able to detect that deep pressure. Okay, now let's move on to the next picture. Again, some of this we've seen. This is just a different model. So all of this top area here is the epidermis. All of this pink area right here is going to be the dermis. That's where you're going to find your hair follicle, your sebaceous gland, and your sweat duct. Sweat gland. And then the layer underneath that, where you see all this yellow dot, which is your adipose tissue, this layer is going to be your hypodermis. And again, remember, a hypodermis is not part of the skin. The only two layers of the skin are going to be your epidermis and dermis. Okay, we had this long brown structure here. That long brown structure was the hair root. The expanded portion down here is your hair bulb, and the hole at the bottom is your hair papilla. Your hair sits in this purple pocket. That purple pocket or purple sheath is called your hair follicle. So you're seeing it cut open here. Here you're seeing an intact hair follicle. And when that hair leaves the skin, so here you'll see it sitting above the skin, that's the visible hair, that is called your hair shaft. The white ball of lines down here, that is going to be your sweat gland. Then you have the long tube going up from the sweat gland, that's your sweat gland duct, and it's going to end in these holes, these white holes. Those are the pores of your sweat glands. Okay, this corpuscle at the top here. I'm going to get my pen again because sometimes it's kind of hard to see this one. So that one, it looks like a little flower sitting on a stem. That is your tactile corpuscle, also called your Mesner's corpuscle. And this one down here that looks like a layered onion, that is your lamellated corpuscle, also called your Pacinian corpuscle. Then we have the sebaceous gland. So all of this here is the sebaceous gland, and then you'll see an intact sebaceous gland right here. Remember, your sebaceous glands are going to be producing an oily substance that conditions hair. Then you have the muscle that is associated with each hair follicle, and you can see that muscle here. I'm just going to draw an orange line on it. So right here and here, you have the Erector Pili muscle. Again, Erector Pili muscle will make the hair stand erect. Okay, now let's go to these fingers that act as like the teeth of a zipper to sew your epidermis and your dermis together. So going down from the epidermis, you see these fingers. I'm kind of outlining them in orange here. Those fingers coming down are your epidermal ridges. And then you see these fingers in the dermis pointing up. Those fingers are called your dermal papilla. And your dermal papilla and your epidermal ridges will fit into each other really tight, like the teeth of a zipper, so that your skin layers do not easily come apart. So it adds strength to your skin and adds that extra strength to the attachment between the epidermis and the dermis. Let's keep moving on. This is just another model here. I wish the picture was clear. It did not come out very clear, but I wanted to point something out here in this one, and that is the Apricon sweat gland. So right here, this is actually the Apricon sweat gland. So that is the sweat gland that we have, I don't know why it's pointing here. The Apricon sweat gland is the sweat gland we've been talking about. So it's going to be found all over the skin. So on a hot summer day when you're sweating, you can touch your arm and you feel that watery substance. That's the sweat gland that's responsible for that is your Apricon sweat gland. But when you hit puberty, you have another sweat gland that really kicks into overdrive, and it's called the Merocrine sweat gland. The Merocrine sweat gland is associated with puberty. So it's associated with those regions where pubic hair forms. So at puberty, you have the hair underneath your arm start growing. So your Merocrine sweat glands are going to be found underneath the arm in the armpits. And it's also associated with the genital areas. So again, Merocrine sweat gland is going to be associated with puberty. So hair growth under the arm and your hair in the pubic areas. That's where you're going to see the Merocrine sweat glands being located. The sweat that comes from American sweat glands is a thicker, almost a milkier type substance, and it's associated with a very strong odor. Whereas your Apricon sweat glands are not associated with a whole lot of odor, and they have a very watery sweat secretion. Also, what I wanted to point out here was the layers of the skin. So all of this that I'm circling in orange right here is thick skin. And I'm just going to circle a portion of the thin skin right here. That's your thin skin. So thin skin is represented over on this side. And thick skin is represented over here on the right side. Okay, so let's go over the layers. This bottom layer here, so right at the basement membrane where these two connect, or right at the epidermal ridges and the dermal papilla, that layer of epidermis where those fingers come down, that's going to be your stratum basale or stratum basal. Then the layer up from it, so all of this layer in here, that I'm coloring in, that's going to be your stratum spinosum. Then you have this darker layer right here. That darker layer is going to be your stratum granulosum. Then you have this white layer. That white layer is the stratum lucidum. And then the top pink layer up here is going to be your stratum corneum. Okay, so what are the differences between thin skin and thick skin? Okay, thick skin has a very thick stratum corneum. So you can see it right here. I'm going to put the arrow right here. That is your stratum corneum. So thick skin has a very thick stratum corneum. And you can see over here, there's just this itty bitty, I don't know if you can even see my line right here. But there's a very thin stratum corneum in thin skin. The other major difference is that thick skin has this stratum lucidum. Remember that white line right here. So thick skin has that stratum lucidum and thin skin does not. Okay, so make sure you know the differences in thin skin and thick skin. Thin skin has a thin stratum corneum and no stratum lucidum. Thick skin has a thick stratum corneum and has the stratum lucidum present. Now let's go down to our next picture. Okay, I'm not going to go into detail here because everything that I pointed out before is on this picture or this model. But I do wanted to present it here or give it to you here so that you can study the different looks. So when you get into a practical, if you see this model, you can identify everything we've talked about on this model as well. One thing to note on here is if we have not gone over it so far, you do not have to worry about it. Okay, so again, if we have not gone over the structures already, you do not have to know it on this model. Okay, so now this, remember, you're going to have to be able to layer those layers of the thick skin. So I'm going to get my little pen again. Okay, and I'm going to draw right where the right where the epidermis and the dermis meet each other. Okay. So that orange line there is the basement membrane. Remember the basement membrane from looking at your stratified epithelial tissues. That basement membrane is the connecting point of your skin or your epidermis to your dermis. So it's a connecting point between your epithelial cells and your connective tissue. So in this, underneath that basement membrane is going to be your dermis. And everything above that basement membrane is going to be your epidermis. So epidermis is above the basement membrane and the dermis is below the basement membrane. Okay, so in the epidermis, we have to know all of these layers. So these are the layers of thick skin. So let's go over them. This layer right here that sits just upon or just above that basement membrane, that is your stratum basale or stratum basal. Then you have this area in here, all the granulated looking cells, that is your stratum spinosum. Then this dark layer right here, that is your stratum granulosum. So dark granules, stratum granulosum. Then you have this hot pink layer right here. That hot pink layer is going to be your stratum lucidum. And then this very thick layer right here is going to be your stratum corneum. So this has to be thick skin because you have a very thick layer of stratum corneum, and you have this layer right here called the stratum lucidum. Remember, in thin skin, this stratum corneum, this thick layer up here, would be very, very thin, and you would not have the stratum lucidum because it's not present in thin skin. Your thin skin is found over most of your body, and your thick skin is found on the soles of your feet and the palms of your hand. Let me go back and erase the rest of my scribbles down here. Okay, let's go to our next image. Okay, on the practical, you do have to tell me whether it is thick skin or thin skin. So what we're looking at here, I'll get my pencil again. Okay, so in this center picture right here, I'm going to put a 1 here. So in picture 1, we have thin skin. In picture 2, we have thick skin. So again, what is the difference? How can you tell the difference when you're looking on or under a microscope? So again, in picture 1, you see that right here, this is your stratum corneum, and it's very, very thin. This is your stratum corneum in this one, and you can see it's very thick. So that's your clue that this is thick skin in picture 2 and thin skin in picture 1. Also in picture 2, you can see this hot pink layer right here. That's going to be your stratum lucidum. Now, sometimes it's hard to picture or to define that stratum lucidum. So your biggest indicator is going to be how thick your stratum corneum is going to be. Also on this picture over here to the very left-hand side, this drawing here, I'm going to get my pencil again. Okay, in this picture here, you see the little star. Okay, I've asterized it. Okay, we have the epidermis. Remember, epidermis is the top layer of the skin, and it sits upon the bottom layer of skin called your dermis. The epidermis has little fingers coming down called the epidermal ridges, and the dermis has fingers going up called the dermal papilla. And the epidermal ridges and the dermal papilla kind of zip themselves together and fit very, very tightly so that the skin layers do not separate from each other. Okay, so let me erase again my scribbles, and let's go to the next image. Okay, here again, you will see thick skin and thin skin. You do have to be able to recognize the difference. So if I ask you what type of skin this is, again, listen to this. If I ask you what type of skin this is, what I'm looking for is it thick skin or thin skin? The one on the picture on the left is thick skin, and the picture on the right is thin skin. What you can see is this picture on the left has a very thick stratum corneum. Again, that's your big indicator. That's your big telltale sign. So all of this right here is going to be your stratum corneum. Right here, that's all your stratum corneum on that one. So you're seeing a very thick stratum corneum on thick skin and a very thin stratum corneum on thin skin. Okay. Let's go down to our next image. It's just another practice for you. Again, your stratum corneum is very, very thin here in the thin skin and very thick in the thick skin. So again, if I ask you what type of skin this is on a practical, what I'm looking for is, can you tell me whether it's thick skin or thin skin? Going down to the next image, now you have to be able to identify your integumentary accessory structures under a microscope. So if you see an image like this underneath a microscope, what do you have to label? Let me show you. I'll grab my pen again. Okay, so here we are. This right here in the blue humps, that's going to be your epidermis. And all of this in that one hump over there, that is your dermis. So you have to know your epidermis from the dermis. Then you have to know, I'm going to draw a line here where the hair follicle is. So all of that line right there is going to be your hair follicle. There's a hair follicle over here. So that's a hair follicle. Now I'm going to draw in green here. I'm going to trace in green the sebaceous gland. The sebaceous gland kind of looks like cauliflower, or if you've ever cut a garlic pod open, it kind of looks like that. So right here in green is going to be your hair follicle, or sorry, your sebaceous gland. So sorry, your sebaceous gland. Now I'm going to draw a line where the Erector Peli muscle is. Your Erector Peli muscle is going to be a pink stripe or pink line that comes off towards the base of that hair follicle. So that is your Erector Peli muscle. So again, in this one, you want to be able to label your epidermis from your dermis. So your epidermis is very tightly packed pink. Your dermis is this irregular, dense connective tissue down here. So you can see that is your dermis. This long shaft here, that long shaft is going to be your hair follicle. So here's one on the left, here's one on the right. Then this little cauliflower looking structure here, or garlic pod that's cut open, that structure here on the left and this structure here on the right are your sebaceous glands. And then this striped pink is going to be right here, is going to be your Erector Peli muscle. So again, make sure you can recognize those structures under a microscope. Okay, we're going to look at another example to just give you a little bit more practice of seeing this under a scope. Okay, I'm going to get my pen again. So this long tube that you see, I'm outlining in green, that long tube right there is a hair follicle. Okay, you can see it's HF on there, so I'm just going to put F for follicle there. So that's the hair follicle. And this, let me get in the red right here. All of this I'm circling in red. This is your sebaceous, whoa, went a little while with my outline there. The red is your sebaceous gland, okay? So again, the green is hair follicle and the red is the sebaceous gland. Now, one we haven't gotten to yet because it wasn't visible in the other picture, I'm going to outline in blue here. You see this collection of little circles down here, that collection of little circles, that is your sweat gland. Okay, so all those little circles are your collections that go together to form your sweat glands. Again, the long tube here in green is your hair follicle. Associated with each hair follicle is your sebaceous gland here circled in red. And then down below that, you will see a collection of little circles. That is your sweat gland. Now let's erase all my scribbles and we'll go on to the next image. Here is another one. Oh, I didn't erase all my scribbles. Okay. This is another image of a microscopic view of the skin. So let's go over those structures yet again so that we can make sure that you know them very, very well. Lord have mercy, can't get my pen here. There we go. Okay. So I'll tell you what, let me zoom out. Okay. Zoom out one. I'm going to zoom out one more time so that you can see the whole slide here. Here we go. Okay, now I'm going to get my pen. Okay, so you're not seeing the whole tube or the whole line. but it would go, this is not very, let me get a bolder color or a bolder pen here. So right here, this would be your hair follicle right here, okay? You can only see part of it in this slide, but it is still your hair follicle, okay? So don't be afraid to kind of make up some of those lines when you see it under a scope. You can still see that this would be your hair bulb region down in this area, the bottom of that green tube. Then we have some other structures. Oh, not pink. Let me not get that one. Can't see it on this. Okay, so in blue right here, I'm going to trace your sebaceous gland. Remember, your sebaceous gland looks like kind of cauliflower or a garlic pod cut open. Okay, and then down here at the bottom of the hair, you see all these little collections of little circles. Those collection of circles, it's going to be your sweat glands. Okay, then I'm going to draw in orange here. All of this in orange is your erector pili muscle, okay? So let me erase all this and we'll go over it one more time. So looking at it here, you can see this, you can really see the hair bulb area of that hair follicle down here that would go up this direction, okay? That is your hair follicle. The little cauliflower structures associated with your hair follicle, that's your sebaceous gland. The collection of little circles towards the bottom of your hair follicle, this collection of little circles is your sweat glands. And then this pink stripe coming off towards the hair bulb area would be your erector pili muscle. You also have to label, again, the epidermis, dermis, and hypodermis. So I'm going to do the picture on the right first, just because it's a little bit darker and you can see it a little bit clearer, and then we'll look at the one on the left. So here on the right, this darker upper layer is your epidermis. Your dermis is the middle color, so it's the middle darkest color. And then the lightest is going to be your hypodermis, because remember your hypodermis right here, all of this white area, that's going to be your adipose tissue, so it's a very light color. So again, the darkest is going to be your epidermis. The medium in darkness is going to be your dermis, and the lightest layer here is your hypodermis. So looking over at the image on the left-hand side, again, the epidermis is up here, very, very dark layer. The dermis is fairly light, but not the lightest. And then you get down here to the hypodermis, it almost looks non-existent because it's white in a lot of those areas. So that lightest area right there would be the hypodermis. Now we get down to the fingernail. Okay, we're going to do this picture or this image on the left-hand side of the fingernail. So we've cut away some of the finger here so that you can see the fingernail. The fingernail has skin that helps attach that fingernail to the finger. The skin on top of the fingernail, right here at the base of the fingernail, where the fingernail goes into the finger, that skin, which we normally call a cuticle, is called the Epinychium. Ep-E or ep-O, that prefix means upon. So the Epinychium sits upon the fingernail. Then down here, you have the Hyponychium. Hypo means below. So the Hyponychium sits below the fingernail. So if you've ever ripped off the end of your fingernail and you've pulled a little skin with it, that painful skin that you pulled there, that is the Hyponychium. So on this picture on the left, you need to know the Epinychium. Get my little pen again. I love my little pen. Okay, so you need to know the Epinychium. You need to know the nail body. That's just the surface of the nail. And then you need to know this Hyponychium here. That's the skin underneath the nail. Okay, so this is the Hyponychium right underneath the nail. Right here is your Epinychium on top of the nail. Now let's look at the nail here in the right. So this area here of the nail that you would normally cut with the fingernail clippers, that is your free edge. All of your nail that looks pink, that is called the body of the nail or nail body. Then you have this little half moon area right here, that's called the lanule or lanula. So if you've ever heard of a lunar landing, that means you land on the moon. So lunar or luna means moon. So here you see the half moon white area. So it's called lanulate or lanula. Then you have the skin on top. Remember, if it sits upon, it's epi or epo. So that's your eponychium. And if you look under here, draw a little arrow, sorry. That green arrow right there is going to be pointing to the hyponychium. So those are the structures you have to know for the fingernail. The rest of these structures listed here, you do not have to know for your practical.